Welcome to Tools for Liberty. This is episode 4. I'm Pastor Amanda Spare, and this is Pastor Dylan Proctor.
Hello. Today we're going to be talking about codependency, and this relates to some other different terms we've used before. So we are going to be giving a term definition for codependency, but we're also going to be discussing the idea of righteousness and love. Then we're going to discuss the idea of unhealthy relationships and what happens when people have bad dependency that shouldn't be there. And then after that, we're going to talk a little bit about social media and how that has changed how people's relationships are. So we're going to be looking at sort of dependency and relationships and then how that relates to some of the things in the modern world.
All right, and so for our first term is codependency, and how we're going to define that and then use it throughout this episode is that codependency is an unhealthy reliance on another person or tool which can be used to manipulate the world to suit a desire or desires. All
right, so it's important to remember that codependency is not always just dependency on a person, but it also could be dependency on a tool. We'll talk a little bit about that more earlier, but do keep that thought in your mind. The next term I want to bring up is that of righteousness. So righteousness really is this idea that there's healthy order and healthy relationships between the different variables in life. So there are people that are in life, but also there's ideas, there's institutions, there's businesses. And righteousness is when all the different variables in life have a healthy balance and healthy relationship with one another.
Another topic or word that is going to kind of permeate this conversation is love. And so how we're going to use that and define it in this episode is that love is the active ability to give and preserve life in complex situations. So keep all these terms in mind as we continue to talk through this topic about relationships.
Okay, so obviously we all have dealt with people in life, and we all know circumstances where there's some sort of unhealthy dependency that people have. A lot of times we see this in relationships where there's really an imbalance. Somebody has an unhealthy dependency on someone else. It could be they're emotionally attached in a healthy way. They could be financially attached in an unhealthy way, but there's this sort of unhealthy dependency that happens to people, and it can be really in more than just being attached to other people. Sometimes it's ideas. People have different things in life. We see things where people fake illnesses or they exaggerate certain things. They have sort of a victim status that they need in order to obtain attention or things like that. But people can unmistakably have unhealthy dependencies on different things in life.
And so as you talked about earlier, it was these people are doing these unhealthy relationships for a purpose, and so it is not kind of arbitrary or anything like that, but that people are manipulating, whether it is a person or it's circumstance or a situation or an organization, whatever it may be, they are using this, and really they are reducing people or these organizations to kind of things that then they can get a desired result. So there's something in their life that they feel is lacking, whether that is attention or identity or love or whatever it may be, and they feel the only way they can get that desire filled is through manipulating or harming other people or whatever else they may be using.
Yeah, it can take a lot of different forms, and people that have issues with this, and I know I've said in previous videos, I firmly believe people are more complex than they are self-aware, but people who have issues with dependency are very resistant to change in this. They're resistant and maybe even hostile to anything which would challenge the sort of life setup that they have going on. People get very comfortable in their dependencies. You know, people create behaviors where this is how they get attention. They get, maybe it's financial things. Maybe they've just kind of got on autopilot where they're dependent on another person and they're resistant to change from that. But unmistakably, people can have unhealthy relationships with people and things, and they're very resistant to the transformation out of that. People are very resistant to an evolution where they would move away from that. So really the question that we have when discussing this topic, because we want this to be something which gives people a practical tool for dealing with this situation. Of course, the name of this program is Tools for Liberty. We are trying to give people critical thinking tools for dealing with this. So the question really is, Amanda, how do we deal with the situation when people have this unhealthy dependency on someone else or something else?
Well, and I think the first place we have to start is, especially as we are both ministers and we work within the church, is we have to talk about our theology of God and then our theology of love. Because I think we often misuse these ideas to whether it is to continue poor behavior or to allow poor behavior to continue. And so that's where I'm going to kind of start there. And so as we look at God and look how God interacts with God's self, with creation, with humanity, is we see a God of love and we see a God of unconditional love. And so we really have to kind of break that word apart too, because we misuse that often. And so unconditional love, we have to start where God loved his creation regardless of status or where people were born or their nationality or whether or not they were part of a specific tribe or if they were wealthy. And so that's what kind of the idea starts from of unconditional love, is it was not conditioned on who you were. And so God calls them and he says, I am going to be your God and you will be my people. And it will not be dependent upon who you are or what you can achieve, but on the fact that I am God and I am faithful. And however, this call does not come without action on the person's part. And so we often see God described as a parent. And we see in our scripture where God says, like, you're going to be disciplined. And so it's this idea of just like if you had healthy parents where they love you and you can never lose that love that they have for you. There's nothing you could do that would make them stop loving you. However, they're not going to let you do just whatever you want to do. They're going to help create healthy boundaries and rules to keep you safe and to keep others safe. And so this is exactly how God works. And he said, God tells us about what it is to have life and have it to the fullness. Again, how we describe love. It is creating and sustaining life in these complex situations. And we get this all because of God's character and how God calls us to interact with the world. So if we have a better theology and definition of love and God, then I think we're going to start this journey and this conversation in a better place where we're not enabling people to continue in where they are, but we are calling them towards transformation.
Yeah, so building off of that, a good theology of love. And I know anyone who knows me, I talk about the Logos a lot. I think it's so important to have a balanced theology that understands both the love and the Logos and how they overlap. But just picking up where Amanda sort of left off is love does not force behavior. It does not enable other behaviors either, but it doesn't come in and say, we're going to force you to behave a certain way. Instead, what it does is love comes in and says, we're going to open the door for a new reality. We're going to open the door for a new behavior. Love creates opportunities for new behaviors from people. People have the opportunity to behave differently. When we love people, we come in and we say, I love you and I want to negotiate out life with you. I want to create something new. And even when we have relationships with friends, family, we come in and we say, we care about one another, but we have expectations. We want to have a good, common, healthy goal of life-giving, this idea of blessing, preserving life, giving life, this idea that there's healthy life going on. There's the goal within healthy relationships of this healthy life. And when people come together, when Christ loved people, he did not come in and say, I'm going to force you to behave a certain way. Instead, he said, I'm going to open the opportunity for you to enter into this new reality where there is a new life and there's new behaviors which you can have in this new reality.
And so as you talked about goals and you talked about negotiating, and these become very important because you can't just break into somebody's life and be like, okay, you're in a bad place. You need to not be in a bad place and then kind of drop out. And so, and this is really, again, as we look at the character of God, is God does not just jump in and say, hey, here's 10 commandments, bye, have fun. God walks with the people. And so he gives them a projection of what it means to be a people of blessing. And blessing, as we've defined oftentimes, is giving life. And so God interacts, and then he calls us to interact with others. And so there's this goal of there being life and life to its fullest. And then we have to figure out, okay, I'm here, I need to be there. How does that work? And that starts with negotiating. And when we say negotiating, we can often think of those in very kind of like, very political,
almost business-like.
Yeah, sign a paper here, and we have negotiated whatever it is we want, so that everyone can get what they want, or so nobody can get what they want, whatever it may be. But it's really more complex than that, and that it's just interacting with one another in a healthy way. And it says, okay, you have been codependent upon this situation, for instance, and so you don't want to be codependent. You don't want to just rely on that for your identity or for attention or for love or whatever it is. Okay, then what do you need? So you do need love. You do need to be healthy. You do need an identity. But what is that that's in a healthy interaction? So we have to walk with people and journey with them throughout this. And it may be that then we have to also analyze our own lives and say, okay, where am I and where do I need to be? And then people are going to be resistant to change, but then that just means we have to continue to encourage them towards change, because God never, interacts with people and leaves them where he finds them.
No, that's a great point to have, because I feel like one of the problems that people who, especially within the church, people within the body of Christ, they feel like they're compelled to be enablers. They don't have a good enough theology of love to differentiate between being an enabler and being Christ-like, where you are both the Logos and one of unconditional love, where you are a person who says, I want to have orderly transformation away from the things of chaos, away from the things of misery, to a better and healthier state. You know, Christ never did leave people in the same position they were in when they were willing to receive this new behavior. Again, Christ came and loved people. He created an opportunity for new behavior, but he never left people who wanted to receive that new behavior in that same state. I think a great example of this, which shows both the love side of Christ and the Logos side of Christ, and again, for those who may not be familiar with the term Logos, it's this idea of orderly transformation. It's the Greek term for word, but it's so much more than that. It's this idea of giving order to the universe through or moving away from chaos and into order. And we've seen the Logos in the beginning bring life, light, and being as instruments of creating order. But as Christ comes and gives order in people's lives, I think one of the greatest examples of this is the man who's lowered through the roof. If you look in the Gospels, you'll find this story. There's a man who's lowered through the roof, and his friends have faith in Jesus. And it's the faith of the friends that Jesus notices. And he goes over to this situation. And of course, I'm paraphrasing all this, but Jesus comes to the situation, and he looks at all this. He sees the faith of the friends, and he tells the man to get up off of his mat and walk. And one of the things about that is Christ didn't come and say, well, look, I can save you and tell you you're freed from sins, but you're going to stay on the mat. He didn't say, continue to be dependent on this mat. Matt, I will bring healing and restoration into your life, but stay dependent where you're at. I'm just going to enable you into that state of weakness and misery. This is not what Christ did at all, not even in the least bit. Christ came and he had unconditional love in this situation. He said, I love you, but I'm also the Logos, which means there's going to be transformation that is orderly. Unconditional opportunity for this. Christ says the opportunity is going to be there unconditionally, but it is still an opportunity for new behavior. You can't remove that side of it. And for the man who was healed in that situation, Christ tells him, get up, take your mat, and go walk, which is interesting on so many levels, because the idea, if you go back to the Greek term parousia, it's sort of your life trajectory, what your purpose in life is, your life course. So he tells him to get up and walk, but it's much more than just get up and walking. He pretty much says, get up and go have a life. You haven't been able to have a life for this situation, but get up and go have a life. And when we are people who are called to be Christ-like, this means we have to be unconditionally loving, but we also have to be the Logos. We have to be people of transformation. So if you're one of the people, and I know people will have the best of intentions, and they'll feel guilty about being an enabler, but they don't have the theology of Christ that says he is the love and the Logos. It really breaks my heart. I feel like in recent, the recent era of critical thinking has almost completely forsaken the Logos side of Christ, this idea of orderly transformation. But we're not called to be enablers. Christ did not enable people, but instead he called people to be transformed. But Amanda, pick up a little bit there for me.
Well, and I think that's something that's very hard for the church to hear sometimes. Well, maybe it's not hard to hear, but it's hard to then put into practice, because we do want to help people. We want to feed people. We want to clothe people. We want to see those needs in their lives, and we want to meet them. And there's nothing, I think, intrinsically wrong with doing those things. However, if we're allowing poor behaviors or actions or priorities to continue, we can become enablers. And so then we're kind of almost left with this option, or this question of, what then do we do with people who don't want orderly transformation, who are content with remaining in those codependent relationships, or who are good with remaining in just this imbalance, and they don't want the goal of righteousness, they don't want to journey towards a better place. So what do we do? And that, I think, is a very difficult then response. Okay, so if I want unconditional love, and yet I have created these healthy boundaries and people are crossing them, what am I left with? And often it feels like it's unconditional love when we say, okay, you have this bad behavior or attitude, and it's harmful to yourself and others, so I can't allow you, to maybe interact with people or allow you to go on this trip or to do this certain thing, because you're going to hurt yourself or others if I allow you to do that. And so that seems harsh, but that really is, again, creating opportunity, because when you said this is the healthy boundary and you cannot cross it, then you're forcing them, we're not forcing that person, but you're allowing them that opportunity to reflect and think, okay, what then do I need to change so I can participate in the life or the community or whatever is happening? And it's difficult, and that's hard, because we want church to be the feel-good place and for it to have the easy answers, and it doesn't always have that. There are complex answers, but it will always be, if our starting point is God and a proper understanding of God's unconditional love, even in the difficult times and conversations, we'll find that it will I think spur people towards righteousness and towards a better life.
Yeah, I agree. And you bring up some really good points with the idea of what do we do with people who are resistant to change? And, one of the things that I think is so important is in life, we have to be people who have good negotiating skills. And when we talk about negotiating skills, we're not talking about something like a real estate transaction. We're talking about just interacting with people and say, well, what are our common life goals? And sometimes people do this unconsciously. They don't even realize they're doing it, but we negotiate things all the time as people. When we interact, we just, whether it be we decide what we're going to watch on TV, or we just come in and say, what are we going to do this evening? People negotiate so many things in life. And what we see happening in these codependent relationships is that people have very different goals. And there may be no goals at all, to be honest. It may just be completely content and completely stagnant. And for people who are wanting to help in that situation, they look at this and they say, well, it's stagnant. What do we do next? What do we do? How do we get past here? And I think one of the first steps is really figuring out the goals that each of the people there have and negotiating out a common goal in life. Again, people, they like to manipulate to get what they want out of the world, but being able to sit down and say, we're going to have a common goal, that's a good starting point, because then you have some clarity in what's going on.
Well, are you good to move on to our current issue?
Yep, let's get to the current issue, because it's one that's really relevant to our topic today. It's the idea of social media and social skills. And I realize that a lot of people watching this, pretty much everybody watching this is going to be watching it on social media. We are hoping to branch out a little bit. If anyone would like to help with the marketing of this, please hit us up. We did have a camera issue earlier. We have a higher quality camera, and we were filming this, and things just went awry. The camera decided it did not get along with the cord, so it decided to power down. Well, anyways, I want us to talk about social media and pretty much relationships, because we've been talking about relationships. So in our topic today, I think it'd be great to talk about how social media and social skills relate to one another. So one of the things that's very clear is people can get on social media, and with almost minimal effort at all, they can do all sorts of things. So
right, and it's not just minimal effort, but it's almost minimal thought. And we pick on social media so much, and it does create itself to be a kind of an easy target to kind of blast and say there's. And so please understand, as we are talking about social media, we're not, obviously, because we're using social media, it's not an evil thing intrinsically. However, lots of people do use it as a tool to manipulate it, to get this kind of whatever it is that they want, but with putting kind of just minimal effort, minimal thought. And it's really the way in which we interact on social media is not the way we would interact with somebody face to face. We wouldn't say the things we would say. We wouldn't kind of have the attitudes we would have. There are some things like are done on video, I guess, on Facebook that you wouldn't normally think you would do in front of people, but because there's a distance, and it's not a real distance that is kind of created in our minds that says that allows us to interact or to manipulate people in such a way that can be harmful to ourselves or to others.
Yeah, and it's really easy for people to have one-way relationships, and sometimes these even appear to not be one-way relationships, but it looks like that. The medium can look like there's a lot of people having a conversation, but in reality it can be one person putting out their disposition, and it kind of lacks that sort of human behavior. That being said, there are really good things that social media is for. It's great for sharing, photos, pictures, and even organizing things, but at the same time, it's very different than how we relate to one another personally. The medium can look very different than how it is in reality. For instance, Amanda, you were saying that it looks like there's a distance when there may not be, and then other places it feels like people may think they're getting close to close. They may be getting a certain type of attention when in reality they're not.
Right. Well, and like you talked about goals, so some people, they go onto social media because they want to share with family about different things, or other people use it as a platform for personal issues or for political issues. And so there's all these different goals happening that individual people have. And it's interesting, if you really look at your Facebook feed or your Instagram or Twitter or whatever, is all these people are communicating, but in a real sense, communication is not happening, because person A has this goal and person B has another goal, and they're interacting, but even though words are being exchanged, they're not moving towards the same goal, and they're not moving towards real communication and responding and hearing and understanding. And so there's this very easy trap we can fall into of having just one-way relationships and to be self-oriented, because even if I allow you to interact with me, it's all in the sense of what I want or how I want you to interact. And so it's very this kind of self-oriented, and to where my desires become paramount to anything else that is going on. And so this is like, really what we're saying is codependency is what I want is first, and then how I manipulate people or situations or things is the means to get that, and then their feelings or the truth or the reality around me is secondary to what I want.
Yeah, and again, it can really seem like there's a lot of people talking when it really is self-oriented, because the thing is, people don't have to negotiate out the terms of the conversation. Even when we talk with people, we negotiate out a lot of things we may not realize, such as the volume. Like, we come in, we talk with someone, if someone's talking at a certain volume, it would be very peculiar if I was screaming back at you just sitting here. We negotiate out, we're in a room, we try to do away with the different background noises, but the AC is still doing stuff. But, we negotiate this stuff out even though we may not be consciously doing it. And we negotiate the volume, the tone. If someone comes in angry, someone will respond to that. But when we have this sort of platform with what can happen online is people they lack all of the things which require negotiation. You don't have to set the parameters of the conversation with one another. One person can come in with their own attitude, their own tone, and the other person can respond, or many other people can respond or not respond at all by a completely different tone or completely lack of certain attitudes. And it's this big push and pull where there's absence of certain things, there's the presence of other things, and there's no negotiation about which things are important and which things are not important in terms of interaction and relationships.
And this then makes it difficult, because often throughout our conversation about relationships, we're talking about, creating an opportunity for people to do better. And online is very difficult to create those opportunities, because, again, people are coming to it with their own goal and agenda. And if you ever were to say, okay, let's move towards having an honest conversation, our goal is to, do ABC, whatever, then, they can just ignore you. They can, continue to scroll. And so it's very difficult to then create those opportunities for better behavior. Because even when you call them out on maybe poor behavior or being rude, then you almost join the fray of creating chaos bait, to reference what we talked about last week. And so I think we have to have that understanding when we go into social media, saying, okay, people are going to act inappropriately, and there may not be a good option for me to respond. And so maybe, either not responding or having a personal conversation with that person, if that's an option, will be better than continuing the chaos online. Yeah.
And I think one of the things interesting about this is that, historically, when new technology has come, it's come at a rate where generations, they learn how to implement it into life, and sort of the older generations pass down the social skills of interacting with things down, and technology has evolved at sort of a rate where people can have a certain amount of maturity using it. But I think one of the things that is so peculiar about sort of the modern era of communication is communication has evolved faster than the social skills have evolved that go with it. And we no longer have to negotiate everything out in our social interactions. We can get online with completely detached. It's almost like people are speaking different languages. They have different goals. There's no commonality between them. And, people will get online. They will say things they wouldn't otherwise share. They will do things they wouldn't otherwise do. And it's something which is completely different than healthy, normal human interactions, which one of the things that we would like to say is social media is not intrinsically bad. I know we pointed that out earlier, but we're talking today about how we create healthy relationships. We look at God and we say God has unconditional love, but it's also connected with the Logos and transformation. We see that there is a healthier structure for relationships than just the social media platform. The social media is great for a lot of things that we couldn't otherwise do. It's great for sharing videos. It's great for doing something like we're doing now. However, it shouldn't be our main structure for healthy interaction. And I don't want anybody watching this video to feel guilty because they're on social media. As long as you have good, healthy human interaction in life, you're doing fine. But on the back to the idea of codependency, sometimes people can be dependent on things which are not other people. People will be dependent on the online world for their human interaction. They don't know how to relate to other people and negotiate out things well, so they go online to do those social interactions, and they're no longer pressed to fine-tune their character. They don't have to tune their personality. They don't have to negotiate with the world and make adjustments. And, when I come in here and Amanda's talking, over the coffee pot, I talk at the same volume so we can hear one another. We make adjustments so that we can have a healthy interaction. But when you have those barriers where there's no need for negotiating, there's no consequences for poor behavior, it can be very easy to lose those finely tuned social skills, which happen when people have a good understanding of how we interact with one another. And as for the church, it's so important for us to have a good understanding of what our goals are within the church.
And so hopefully then, by kind of bringing these things to mind, some of these things we do kind of do on autopilot or in the back of our minds, and we're not really thinking through. So hopefully by mentioning these things, then we can be a little bit more critical on how we interact, whether it is on social media, online, or even in real life, that we can then think and be more critical of how we do negotiate, and then how that will, because I think if we have good behavior and negotiating skills online or in real life, it will spur other people to be like, oh, okay, that person's not responding like the rest of the people are responding, or they're not responding how I thought they would. And so we have to, it is easy to respond in a way that isn't constructive, but if we're critical about it, then maybe we can create those social skills, and that we can kind of catch up with the technology of communication that we have today.
Yeah, so just to wrap everything up, there are people that have healthy relationships and people who have unhealthy relationships. Sometimes this is with another person. Sometimes this is with social media, where people mistake social media as a sort of replacement for genuine human interaction. So the question is, if we know people who have these bad relationships where they have a dependency on someone or something that's inappropriate, they have a bad dependency on insert noun here, the question is, well, what do we do next? And just to wrap this up for those who may be watching this, the final thoughts we have is, this is what we're giving you in terms of the theological answer to this. God was not an enabler. Christ was not an enabler. Unconditional love does not mean we enable people. Christ was as much the Logos as he was one of love. And as he came and loved people, he always had transformation. So if you have someone in your life that's or maybe you're dealing with this sort of dependency issue in a number of levels, maybe it's directly or indirectly, the first things that I would suggest doing is realizing that we're not called to be enablers. We are called to be people of transformation. And also, what this means is we need to have a goal of what we're being transformed to. Because I imagine that most people who have this problem of someone in their life who has this inappropriate dependency issue, they probably are feeling like things are stagnant. They're wanting things to just get better. They want things to go to a healthier state. Well, I think one of the first steps you can have is say, we're not going to be enablers. We need transformation. But if we're going to say we need transformation, we have to have a goal of what that is. So we need to sit things down and negotiate out what the goals in life are. And sometimes this happens just sitting down and saying, well, what are your goals in life? Sometimes it happens more subtly. Sometimes we do this subconsciously. Something comes up and we sort of make adjustments in life. But we have to have clear, defined goals in life. And if you have people in your life with these dependency issues, it's important to get together, find the root of it. If you can negotiate out the goals, see what it is that they're looking for. Because again, codependency has a lot to do with your manipulating reality to get some sort of desired goal. You have some sort of desire, maybe desires that your plural sense of desires. You have these going on. You want them. You're not sure how to get them any other way than what is comfortable and easy, so you're dependent on the things which supply them. But if those around you who care about you, they can come, or maybe you know somebody in the situation, you care about them, if you can come together and negotiate out, so this is the healthy goal, this is what we want out of life, that is a good beginning of the transformation towards that. So just to wrap everything up, we're not called to be enablers. We have to have transformation, and we need to have goals if we're going to be transformed to them. So negotiating out goals is a great starting point for that.
Well, we hope that you have found this video helpful, and as always, you can leave comments and be appropriate about it. And we will see you next week.
All right. Everybody have